Welcome back everyone. In this lecture we are going to use Nmap to create a network scanner. This network scanner will help us to find host on our local network. So what we basically want to do in this lecture is to use Nmap or specifically an Nmap wrapper that will help us create scripts that can be used later to identify different networks based on our IP address. So let's start with it. So the first thing we need is an Nmap library. So if you go to github.com or just search Nmap golang, you will see a link called Nmap. So this is an Nmap mapper or a mapper provided for Nmap in Golang. So this is basically deployed in Golang. So what you can do is that you can use this mapper to create your own script based on Nmap. So in this lecture we will do this process. We will use this library and then use this library to create our own script which identifies different devices over our network. So the first thing is to install this package on our local PC. To do this, just simply copy the link of this which starts from here, that is github.com/ullakut or whatever the name is, and then /nmap, and then go to the terminal and write go get and then paste the link. So what this command will do is that it will install this library on your own on your local PC, and then you can use this library to create your own scripts. So let's start and then click. I have already installed this library, so there is nothing that appears here, but you will have different progress going on and it will show that this package is being installed. Once this package is installed, this package is available to your local Go system and it can be used to create scripts. So let's start creating scripts. So the first thing we need is that we need to define our target IP address for which you want to search for devices. So in this case I'm going to find devices over my local network, so I'm going to define my target as my local network. So I'm going to create a new variable called target IP, and then I'm going to define the IP address. So it would be 192.168.0.1/24. So I'm going to define a whole subnet which I'm going to search for IP addresses. Okay, once we have that, we can use the library that we just downloaded to create a scanner that will help us scan the devices on our network. So let's create a new scanner. So to do this, you have to write nmap dot new scanner, and you can see that there is an automatic import here which is called github.com/ullakut/nmap. So now we can use this method to create an Nmap scanner which can then be used to identify devices. So once you have that, you can have to see which arguments it requires. So the first argument that it requires is a target IP, but according to this library standards, there is like a certain way for which you should give the inputs. You can't directly write, for example, target IP and then expect the correct results. So you have to wrap everything in Nmap. So to do this, you have to write nmap dot with targets, and then you have to write the target IP here. So this is the first element that you have to define. So first, when you have initialized the targets, the next step is to find out which ports you want to search. So similarly, nmap dot with ports, and then you have to define ports. I'm going to use the very commonly used ports, which are HTTP and HTTPS. So the port numbers for these ports are 80 and I think 443. So now we have two ports. Now we have our target and then the ports that we want to scan. Once we have that, we need to define a timeout so that our program doesn't run indefinitely. So in order to define a timeout, go ahead, according to this library standards, you have to define a certain context for timeout. So To do this, you have to define nmap dot with context. Okay, this context requires a context element. If you open the documentation, you can see that it requires context. So first we have to create an object of type context, and then you can input this object here. So let's go over here and define the context. I'm going to call it ctx. Once you have that ctx, you can call it context dot with timeout, since we want to set a timeout for our program. Once we have that, you can open this documentation and you can further see that it requires two elements. First is the parent context and the second is timeout. So first define timeouts. Let's say we want to have a timeout for 1 minute. So I'm going to call it 1 cross time dot minute. So now we have a timer defined. Now we should also define the first element, which is let's go here, which is the parent context. So in according to this library, the context for parent is context dot background. So now we have this the two elements, which is context dot background and the timeout for which you want to run. So there is an error. If I hover over it, it says assignment mismatch. So it returns an error to if there is no proper context. So I'm going to call it, it's not an error actually, it's called a cancel object. And if you hover over there, you can see that it returns a context and then it returns a cancel function. Cancel function is used for canceling the operations if timeout occurs. So you have to write defer and then cancel. So what this process does is when timeout occurs, it runs this function and then it handles all the executions properly. Now once we have this object ctx, we can give the ctx object here, and now everything looks complete. Now this scanner should be stored in some object. I'm going to call it scanner, and then it also returns an error. So firstly handle error. If error is not equal to nil, log.filter error. Okay, once we have handled the error, our next step is to use this scanner. So to use this scanner, simply you can call scanner.run to run this scanner, and this scanner returns three elements. The first one is the result of scan, the second one is the warnings, and the third one is the error. So I can use error handling here. The next step is warning. I can do the same for warning. I just have to replace error with warning here. Warning. I'm going to use %s here, and I'm going to use fatal f here, \n. Okay, now we have handled warnings and errors properly. The next step is to use these results to find out what our host or devices are. So if you hover over it, it doesn't return properly, but if you click over here, you can see that it returns three elements. The first one is result, which is of type run, and then the warnings, and then the error. Now we have to use this result function. It's a type of struct, so, and it has a list of hosts. So this is the element that we are interested in. So the result contains, where is it, a host object or list of hosts, and we are interested in this host. So what we want to do is that we want to loop over this results.host. So I can start a for loop for host equals to range results.host. So now we have a list of hosts, and we can select host to iterate over each host. So the first check we should perform here is to check if the number of hosts are greater than 0 or not. And if they are not, we can simply continue the loop or skip the loop. So let's put a check here. If length of host dot ports equals to 0, or or length of host dot addresses equals to 0, we can just continue the loop. We don't want to see anything. If the case is not this, then we can simply print out the host addresses and their corresponding ports. So I'm going to use a print statement here. Println. Instead of println, I'm going to use printf, and then I'm going to print s or q in this case, and then IP and whatever host dot address. So the IP address is stored in the first element, and the MAC address is stored in the second element. But in some cases we don't have in every case we won't have this MAC address, so we have to put a check here. For example, if length of host dot addresses is more than 1, then we can also print out the MAC address. Printf %s MAC host dot addresses and 1. So this is how you can print out the host and addresses. Let's run this and see what happens. Go run p1. Okay, first let's open this in terminal and then go run p1. As you can see that now it's scanning. Once it completes scanning, wait, I'm going to put a new line character here so it's more readable. Let's run it again. Okay, now you can see that we have different hosts and the associated MAC addresses here. So this is how you can scan your network and find out the corresponding IP addresses and their MAC addresses respectively. So that's it for this lecture.